Island of the Blue Dolphins. Chapter 20. When I had sorted out the planks and shaped them, the work went fast, so that by late spring I was ready to finish the seams. It was on a windy morning that I made a fire to soften the pitch. The wind was cold and it took a long time to get the fire going. To hasten it, I went down to the beach for dry seaweed. I had started back with my arms filled when I turned to look at the sky, thinking from the feel of the wind that a storm might be close. Off to the north the skies were clear, but in the east, from whence storms sometimes came at this season, stood banks of great clouds, one on top of the other. At this moment, in the deep shadows cast by the clouds, I saw something else. Forgetting that I was carrying a load of seaweed, I threw up my arms. The seaweed fell to the ground. A sail, a ship, was there on the sea, halfway between the horizon and the shore. By the time I had reached the headland it was much closer, moving quickly on the strong wind. I could see that it did not have the red, beaked prow of the Aleuts. Nor did it look like the white men's ship, which I clearly remembered. Why had it come to the island of the Blue Dolphins? I crouched on the headland and wondered, my heart beating fast, if the men who sailed it had come to catch otter. If they were hunters, I must hide before they saw me. They would soon find my fire and the canoe I was making, yet I could go to the cave and probably be safe from them. But if they had been sent by my people to take me away, then I should not hide. The ship moved slowly between the black rocks and into Coral Cove. I could see the men now, and they were not Aleuts. They lowered a canoe and two of the men paddled towards the beach. The wind had begun to blow hard and the men had trouble landing. Finally one of them stayed behind in the canoe, and the other, the man without a beard, jumped into the water and came along the beach and up the trail. I could not see him, but after a while I heard a shout, then another, and I knew that he had found my fire and the canoe. The man he had left in the cove did not answer, nor did the men on the ship, so I was sure that he was calling to me. I crawled down from the rock and went to the house. Since my shoulders were bare, I put on my otter cape. I took my cormorant skirt and the abalone box in which I kept my necklace and earrings. With pronto I then went along the trail that led to Coral Cove. I came to the mound where my ancestors had sometimes camped in the summer. I thought of them and of the happy time spent in my house on the headland, of my canoe lying unfinished beside the trail. I thought of many things, but stronger was the wish to be where people lived, to hear their voices and their laughter. I left the mound and the green grass growing on it, among the white shells. I could no longer hear the man calling, so I began to run. When I came to the place where the two trails met, where I had built my fire, I found the footsteps the man had left. I followed them down to the cove. The canoe had gone back to the ship. The wind was screaming now and mist blew in across the harbor and waves began to pile up on the shore. I raised my hand and shouted. I shouted over and over, but the wind carried my voice away. I ran down the beach and waded into the water. The men did not see me. Rain started to fall and the wind drove it against my face. I waded farther out through the waves, raising my arms to the ship. Slowly it moved away in the mist. It went towards the south. I stood there until it was out of sight. After 2 more springs had gone, on a morning of white clouds and calm seas, the ship came back. At dawn I saw it from the headland far out on the horizon. When the sun was overhead it lay anchored in Coral Cove. Until the sun went down I watched from the headland while the men made a camp on the shore and built a fire. Then I went to my house. All night I did not sleep, thinking of the man who once had called to me. I had thought of his voice calling for a long time, since the night of the storm when the ship had sailed away. Every day during those 2 springs and 2 summers I had gone to the headland and watched, always at dawn and again at dusk. In the morning I smelled smoke from their fire. I went down to the ravine and bathed in the spring and put on my otter cape and my cormorant skirt. I put on the necklace of black stones and the black earrings. With blue clay I made the mark of our tribe across my nose. Then I did something that made me smile at myself. I did what my older sister Eulape had done when she left the island of the Blue Dolphins. Below the mark of our tribe I carefully made the sign which meant that I was still unmarried. I was no longer a girl, yet I made it anyway, using the blue clay and some white clay for the dots. I went back to the house then and built a fire and cooked food for Rontouru and me. I was not hungry and he ate my food and his too. "We are going away," I said to him, "away from our island." But he only put his head to one side, as his father often had done, and when I said no more, he trotted out to a sunny place and lay down and fell asleep. Now that the white men had come back, I could not think of what I would do when I went across the sea, or make a picture in my mind of the white men and what they did there, or see my people who had been gone so long. Nor, thinking of the past, of the many summers and winters and springs that had gone, could I see each of them. They were all one, a tight feeling in my breast and nothing more. The morning was full of sun. The wind smelled of the sea and the things that lived in it. I saw the men long before they saw the house on the headland, far off on the dunes to the south. There were 3 of them, 2 millmen and one who was short and wore a long gray robe. They left the dunes and came along the cliff, and then seeing the smoke from the fire which I kept burning, they followed it, and at last reached my house. I crawled under the fence and stood facing them. The man in the gray robe had a string of beads around his neck and at the end of it was an ornament of polished wood. He raised his hand and made a motion towards me which was the shape of the ornament he wore. Then one of the 2 men who stood behind him spoke to me. His words made the strangest sounds I have ever heard. At first I wanted to laugh, but I bit my tongue. I shook my head and smiled at him. He spoke again, slowly this time, and though his words sounded the same as before and meant nothing to me, they now seemed sweet. They were the sound of a human voice. There is no sound like this in all the world. The man lifted his hand and pointed towards the cove and made a picture in the air of what could have been a ship. To this I nodded and myself pointed to the 3 baskets I had placed by the fire, making a gesture of taking them with me to the ship. Also the cage in which I had put 2 young birds. There were many gestures before we left, though the 2 men spoke among themselves. They liked my necklace, the cape, and the cormorant skirt that shone in the sun. But when we got to the beach, where their camp was, the first thing the man who spoke the most did was to tell the other men to make me a dress. I knew this was what he said because one of them stood in front of me and held up a string from my neck to my feet and across my shoulders. The dress was blue. It was made of 2 trousers, just like those the white men were wearing. The trousers were cut up into pieces and then one of the men sat down on a rock and put them together again with white sewing. He had a long nose, which looked like the needle he used. He sat all afternoon on the rock and the needle went back and forth, in and out, hashing in the sun. From time to time he would hold up the dress and nod his head as if he were pleased. I nodded as if I were pleased too, but I was not. I wanted to wear my cormorant skirt and my otter cape, which were much more beautiful than the thing he was making. The dress reached from my throat to my feet and I did not like it either, the color of it or the way it scratched. It was also hot. But I smiled and put my cormorant skirt away in one of the baskets to wear when I got across the sea, sometime when the men were not around. The ship stayed in Coral Cove 9 days. It had come for otter, but the otter had gone. Some must have been left, after all, who remembered the Aleuts, for on that morning there were none to be seen. I knew where they had gone. They had gone to Tall Rock, but when the men showed me the weapons they had brought to kill the otter, I shook my head and acted as though I did not understand. They pointed to my otter cape, but I still shook my head. I asked them then about the ship that had taken my people away many years before, making the signs of the ship and pointing to the east, but they did not understand. Not until I came to Mission Santa Barbara and met Father Gonzales did I learn from him that this ship had sunk in a great storm soon after it reached his country and that on the whole ocean thereabouts there was no other. For this reason the white men had not come back for me. On the 10th day we sailed. It was a morning of blue skies and no wind. We went straight towards the sun. For a long time I stood and looked back at the island of the Blue Dolphins. The last thing I saw of it was the high headland. I thought of Rontu lying there beneath the stones of many colors, and of Juana Maria, wherever she was, and a little red fox that would scratch in vain at my fence, and my canoe hidden in the cave, and of all the happy days. Dolphins rose out of the sea and swam before the ship. They swam for many leagues in the morning through the bright water, weaving their foam patterns. The little birds were chirping in their cage, and Rontu sat beside me.